Okay, welcome everyone to today's webinar on the State Violence Prevention Grant Program. We're pleased to have you here today so that we can discuss the grant applications and go over some of the questions that we've received prior to the webinar today. A couple of housekeeping items before we get started. Please enter your questions into the Q&A dialog box that will be monitored. And those questions will not only be monitored throughout the webinar, but also added to our list of questions to make sure that we get addressed following the webinar. So we will not be able to address all of our questions today in the allotted time. So if your question is not addressed, it will either be added to the frequently asked questions document, or we will respond directly to you after the webinar. So again, please use that feature chat if you are having any technical issues so that someone on our team can help you with those. But again, I really encourage you to use that Q&A feature so that we can track our questions submitted and make sure that we're getting those questions addressed, especially if it's a common question that we're seeing. I also want to give a caveat that this program is a new grant program, and thankfully we have a lot of interest in it. And so we are responding to questions, whether it's today during the webinar, or if you send it to the OVP mailbox, we are responding as quickly and as thoughtfully as possible. So we appreciate your patience in advance as we work to get back to you. For today's webinar, your microphone is muted. We are recording today's webinar, and we will be posting the recording as well as the slides to the OVP, or the Office of Violence Prevention website. And you'll get that information following the webinar, and you'll have an opportunity to click on the link as well. So you have as much information as possible. For today's webinar, we're going to be going over just a brief introduction to the Office of Violence Prevention, or as you heard me mention, OVP. We'll address a grant program summary, as well as a review of the application sections. Finally, we will have ample time to do an application demonstration so that you can see logistically what that looks like to submit an application for the State Violence Prevention Grant. And then, if time allows, we'll address a few select questions. And again, as reiteration, if your question is not addressed during today's webinar, we will be responding either individually or posting it in the frequently asked questions document, which will be published on our website. To introduce myself, I'm Amanda Powers. I am the Director of the Office of Violence Prevention. As many of you may know, the Office of Violence Prevention was created through Executive Order number 254 by Governor Evers on January 14th of 2025. However, as many of you know, with creating positions in state government, especially new positions, it can take time to get everything set up to get approval to start hiring for that position, which is why I started in October in this position. So again, just a reminder of the time frame and the timeline that we're working with for OVP, and which is why we're really excited and pleased to be able to share this grant opportunity with you all in December. As you can see on the slide, our website is at DOA, and you can find it under Violence Prevention. That's where we're going to be posting the most current information. So I encourage you to check it frequently throughout this grant application process. And then if you're successfully awarded an award, we will be posting additional information for those selected awardees after grant awards are selected, for example, related to reporting and whatnot. So I encourage you to bookmark it, especially if there are questions that you have. That's where the frequently asked questions will be posted. So it's a good idea to have that bookmarked. As I mentioned, we will start with a grant program summary and talk about some of the basic details that are really important to understand about the grant that you are applying for. The purpose of this grant program is to provide funding that can support and replicate and expand effective evidence-based or evidence-informed violence reduction initiatives, and particularly in communities that have been disproportionately impacted by violence. The state, represented by Department of Administration, is intending to use the results of this grant announcement to establish one or more grant agreements, and we intend to award up to $10 million available through this grant announcement. Funding for this program is provided to Wisconsin by the American Rescue Plan Act. And because it is American Rescue Plan Act, I want to highlight that we have a condensed grant award period. What do I mean by that? All ARPA funding, all activities and expenses must be completed by December 31st of 2026. You'll see that throughout the grant announcement document, and we'll be mentioning it a couple of times through today's presentation, but that is a key piece in this announcement, and we hope that folks understand that as they apply, that at this time, this is the funding and that we have through ARPA, and this is the time frame that we have. Another key piece that I wanted to highlight, that we've had several questions, there is no set range for applicants' proposal requests, meaning there's no set budget limit for what your budget request can be. However, we encourage applicants to apply for a reasonable budget for the proposed services that they can reasonably expect to expend in the grant period. So again, that's ending December 31st of 2026. So something to keep in the back of your mind as you're going through this. As always, we have a shared goal with you all and then with the governor's office and with the Department of Administration. We want to make sure we are reaching as many communities as possible and we're being as effective as we can with these funds from the federal government. We want to be good custodians of the funds and we want to make an impact on our state. We all have this shared goal for being effective with these funds and ensuring effective violence and gun violence prevention efforts are underway. And so we'll talk about that a little bit more, but I just wanted to highlight those couple of pieces and make sure folks understood that there is no set range for applicant proposal amounts, but that we encourage you to think about what you have the capacity to administer were you to be awarded a grant. Before we get into the specifics about the application, it's really helpful to go through the documents that have been provided in order to be best prepared to submit an application. So you'll see 4 documents linked on this slide. Again, the slides will be provided afterwards so that the hyperlinks will be available to you and hopefully make it easier for you to apply. The first piece is the grant announcement. This hyperlinks directly to the grant announcement, so it will be really helpful for you to review in its entirety. This is the biggest part of the application process and has the most information. And I encourage you to go through that document, read it in its entirety, and make sure that you understand, all the aspects of the grant announcement. Because again, most of your questions hopefully will be found in that document. So that's our starting point that really explains a lot of the basics about the grant, some of the logistics, some information that can also be helpful were you to be awarded grant funds. It has some information about reporting and what happens after you're successfully awarded a grant. So please be sure to read through that. Next are the application instructions. There are key pieces in here that can help you fill out some of your narrative questions and address some of the questions you might have for filling out the correct contact information. That really is a tool to make sure that you can correctly and effectively fill out the DocuSign application forms. So that's going to be your next step after reading the grant announcement. Then you're going to want to review the convenience copies. What are the convenience copies? I mentioned DocuSign, so all of the applications are due through DocuSign. However, the convenience copies are a PDF copy of the application materials exactly as they appear in DocuSign, but are there so that you can review the materials in advance of logging into DocuSign. Why do I mention that? When you are ready to submit an application in DocuSign, it should be the authorized representative completing that, and you really want to be able to complete that in one sitting. And we'll have some helpful tips and reminders at the end of the presentation as well. But looking at the convenience copy can help you draft your responses for the questions in advance of being in the DocuSign application. So you can look through the convenience copy, Start drafting your reports so that hopefully you can just cut and paste your responses into the DocuSign application. With that being said, I want to stress, applications can only be submitted through DocuSign. Please do not use the convenience copies to draft a response, and do not submit a PDF of your application to our office. We will only be accepting applications through DocuSign. And a reminder, we will have time at the end to go through a demonstration of what that looks like. So I hope that you can understand that we're here to help. We want this to be an easy, straightforward process, but there are a couple of things that we have to get through first before we can do the DocuSign demonstration. We now have important dates for our grant program. This document and this table, rather, are available in the grant announcement, but we wanted to highlight some dates that might be of particular interest to you while we're going through the webinar today. You'll see about halfway down the table that it says questions are due. So if there are additional questions that you have for our office, please submit them by December 17th at 2 p.m. And the best way to do that is either submitting a question through the Q&A on this webinar, or by submitting your question to ovp@wisconsin.gov. That's a shared inbox. It's monitored by multiple folks. And again, we are trying to respond as quickly and thoughtfully as possible, but that is the best way for us to track the questions that we're receiving, to make sure that we're providing clear, consistent information to folks and allowing us to clear up any misunderstandings or any vagueness that maybe folks aren't understanding about the application documents. So again, I encourage you, if you have questions, submit them by 2 p.m. on December 17th to ovp@wisconsin.gov. As I mentioned previously, we have a condensed grant period, as you can see by the eligible expense incurred period. So all expenses and activities will need to end by December 31st of 2026. And if you are successfully awarded a grant, information on required reports will be provided to those successful applicants following the notice of award and execution of grant agreements, but you can see additional information on progress reports in section 1.8 of the grant announcement. This is a competitive award process. We've had a lot of interest, which is wonderful to see, for the prevention grants. We want to remind folks this is competitive, and there is $10 million available for that shortened time frame. So please be mindful and consider that when you're making your grant request, so that you can make a reasonable request of activities you anticipate completing in the time frame allowed. There have been several questions about, submitting multiple applications. Yes, applicants can submit multiple applications for different categories, and you can apply for multiple subcategories under those submissions as well. Also, to reiterate, if you are potentially applying as an applicant in one application and potentially as a sub-award or a subcontract under another, that is also allowable. Again, just be mindful of how all those pieces work together so that we can have a broad range of applications, so that we can consider the state of Wisconsin as a whole when we're looking at these grant awards. I think I've covered those pieces. I just wanted to reiterate to make sure it's really clear. Multiple applications are permitted to be submitted by applicants, and you can apply for more than one category. Make sure that the services that you are proposing, that you can reasonably expect to carry them out in the grant period, and that they are services or activities for which you've had previous experience providing. Please see the grant announcement and the application forms for further details. We have 5 program categories, starting with suicide prevention and firearm storage grants, with several subcategories. If you want more information on organizations that are particularly suited to providing those services, including but not limited to the organizations that we will discuss coming up. You can see the grant announcement under section 4.1, eligible applicants. And you can also see example activities by program category in the grant announcement under section 6, which is regarding the narrative. The category B that we have is evidence-based violence intervention and outreach programs, with one subcategory focusing on hospital-based and the other subcategory focusing on community-based violence. We have criminal justice-based initiatives, domestic violence prevention initiatives, and school-based programming. So we have a broad range, and again, it really is the intention of the governor's office to have a broad range of applicants. We want to understand more about the landscape out there and the services that are needed to meet the violence prevention needs of our state. And because I didn't mention it specifically, I want to circle back and make sure that I do discuss it. For the suicide prevention and firearm storage grants, those subcategories are community-focused training, firearm retailers and ranges-based programming, and then the public awareness or education campaigns. So I just wanted to make sure that that was really clear for folks that we have that option for subcategories. And again, under category A and B, you can choose to apply to more than one subcategory, again, based on your organization's capacity. Let's get into what organizations and applicants are allowable and particularly suited to this work. Before we get into specific applicant requirements, we want to understand what a violence prevention organization is for this funding opportunity. You can find this in the grant announcement under the definitions, but we wanted to discuss a little bit further because there have been a couple of questions along the way about this. So a violence prevention organization includes, but is not limited to, a nonprofit organization, a local government agency, a hospital, a school district, could be an institution of higher education, a firearm retailer or firearm range, and or federally recognized Native American tribal government or organization. One thing that has come up is after school and out of school time programs are eligible applicants and eligible organizations. So I wanted to reiterate that because we've had that question a couple of times. So we've got what type of organization are potentially, well suited and included in violence prevention. And as part of being one of those types of organizations, and organizations also need to operate in a specific geographic region and have the capacity to support activities such as the following: violence prevention, violence intervention, firearm or hunter safety training, health, early childhood, education, economic support, housing, or environmental justice. Again, these are very broad because we know violence impacts and integrates into so many parts of our society and our communities that we want to make sure that folks that are working with their communities in all different facets and capacities see themselves as an eligible applicant, and because we want to have as broad a reach as possible. However, if you have any questions about this definition and where your organization might fall, please reach out to us. Eligible applicants, in conjunction with being a violence prevention organization, should meet all of the following requirements: registered with Wisconsin Department of Financial Institutions. For this specific requirement, I encourage you all to look at the application instructions. There are links to the Department of Financial Institutions in order to get that information that you need for this first requirement. You can look to your application instructions to get that necessary information. And they conduct operations in Wisconsin and have an administrative presence in Wisconsin and in operation since at least January 1 of 2024. Ineligible applicants, I think this is fairly straightforward, so I'm not going to dive too much into this. I will highlight the fourth point, which is other organizations not explicitly eligible in the announcement. If there are questions on if you are an eligible or ineligible applicant, please reach out to ovp@wisconsin.gov so we can address your specific question. or drop it in the chat, and we will include that in the questions that we have. Examples of eligible expenditures. Again, if you want to see more information on this, you can see the grant announcement, section 7.1, eligible uses of funds, personnel, travel, supplies, contractual services, translation, and rent. All different types of eligible expenses, and you can see more information on the grant announcement, because I realize I am taking a long time and I like to talk. So I want to make sure we get through the rest of the slides. In eligible use of funds, please be advised that funds may only be used on expenses for the awarded program. Funds may not be requested for expenses reimbursed from any other program, and ultimately, eligibility of funds is determined by DOA. Further, other ineligible uses of funds include, but are not limited to, the fees incurred from submitting an application, taxes, lobbying, capital purchases, pension, alcohol, tobacco, items that you might be purchasing for personal use, and other uses that are ineligible under the American Rescue Act plan. Let's dive into the application and look at specific application sections. This section is not scored, but it is important that we have all of the correct information for your organization. We want to make sure we have the correct contact information, as well as the correct remit contact person. So again, that should be the person that is identified in the application for whom we can reach out with grant-related questions and for whom any communication about payment should be submitted. The narrative section. This is where we're going to spend most of our time, but hopefully these pieces are fairly straightforward, because that was our intention, to make sure that you could focus on programming and how you are proposing to provide services. So there are 5 questions in total, and make sure that you're following the maximum character count listed per question, and answer the questions fully. The sections are, there's 5 sections: applicant mission, organizational experience, services and programming that's proposed, and population to be intended to be served, and estimated number of Wisconsin residents served. We'll go into deeper details on the following slides, but I wanted to advise you that each of the questions in the application are slightly different based on the applicant category that you're applying for. And so please make sure, if you're applying for more than one application, that you're tailoring your response for the category you're applying for. The first section on applicant mission is hopefully fairly straightforward. We want to understand what's your organization mission and how it relates to the proposed services that you want to provide, and how it relates to the programming of the application category. So those 2 pieces: what's your mission, what are the services you're proposing to provide, and how does it relate to the application category. Organizational experience is a bit more of a extensive section, but still hopefully fairly straightforward, and we're not expecting paragraphs and paragraphs in a novel. We want them to be fairly straightforward and answered in the amount of characters you have. So because we have a limited time frame for the award, we want to make sure that organizations have experience implementing and managing these applicant categories programming. So for this section, we want applicants to identify how they've implemented and managed similar initiatives, services, or programming, how they identify communities and what communities they will be serving and have served, and what those program outcomes have been for their services they provided. And then finally, if they're subawarding or subcontracting funds to carry out services. And if they are, then proposed subcontract material should be provided in the attachment section. Another fairly weighty part of the application, it's all weighted the same for the scoring, but there's more questions to it. So we want to make sure you answer them fully, what are the services or programming that you're proposing to provide? How does the proposed services and programming promote the application category? So again, how does it relate to suicide prevention or firearm storage? Any of those overarching categories, tying it into how it relates to those is what we're looking for. What is your timeline of activities? Again, we have a shortened timeline. We want to know how you propose to get all those services and programming done in the time frame, and if any staff are already known and what their qualifications are. What population do you propose to serve? How have you identified those? What are those existing barriers that they might experience? And how you are proposing to address those barriers through your services and programming. So a couple of pieces to that one. Who do you intend to serve? What are their barriers to getting service? And how are you going to address those barriers? Final section of the narrative, and we've had a couple of questions on this, so I want to pause to take a little bit more time to make sure that everyone understands this so that we don't unintentionally have folks not apply or not fill out this section because of this question. So the purpose of this question is to understand the population that you are proposing to support. And the best method for doing so is through standardized underserved communities and disproportionately impacted communities that are identified through HUD. So that is what the qualified census tracts are. However, while this section is scored, providing services outside of a qualified census tract does not make the applicant ineligible. So just to be clear, even if you don't provide services in a qualified census tract, that does not make you ineligible. So applicants can provide services to both residents in qualified census tracts or they can provide services to communities disproportionately impacted by COVID-19 pandemic. Applicants should discuss how their current and proposed services will support those populations in either category or in both categories. In general, we want applicants to discuss the population served and to be served. And it's our perspective that the services to disproportionately impacted communities, whether in qualified census tracts or those that have been impacted by COVID-19, align closely with communities that have been disproportionately impacted by violence and gun violence. So again, in general, discuss the populations that you're proposing to serve, how they've either been impacted by COVID-19 pandemic or are in a qualified census tract, and how that aligns with those communities that have been disproportionately impacted by violence and gun violence. And I'm going to just pause and make sure, Robin or Richard, were there any other questions that came up in the Q&A for this section before I move on? It doesn't sound like it.
No, we'll have another question for you in a different section. So
okay, perfect. Thank you. Next section in the application is the budget. If you are completing applications with subcategories, you'll see tables for each subcategory, but fill out the budget for each category or subcategory for the funds that you are requesting. Identify those eligible expenses. And when you are identifying those eligible expenses in your budget tables, please be sure to include the anticipated date of expenditure, the description, and the amount. We'll go through this in the demonstration, but the anticipated date of expenditure is a drop-down menu. Then the second half of the budget is the budget summary that will pull and auto-populate information based on your entries in the budget tables. So if you see an error in the budget summary, please go back and check your work, as there may just be a typographical error or something, or a transcription error. And if there are additional questions, your grant announcement is a great place to start to look through and see additional information about this section. And I wanted to reiterate from earlier, there is no set range for applicant proposal requests, but we are encouraging our applicants to select a budget for which they are proposing services that they can reasonably expect to expend in the grant period. Coming to the end of the application, we've got 2 sections left, and they're fairly straightforward. Section 4 is the attestations and required signature. Eligible applicants must certify that they will comply with the statements included in that section. There should be a signature of the authorized representative. Again, all signatures are going to be captured through submission via DocuSign, and there should be only signatures through DocuSign. And the other half of this section is the financial capability questionnaire. Again, because of the limited time frame, we need to understand more about the capacity and the capability of folks to manage federal funds. So you can see the questions in greater detail in the convenience copies, but it's understanding if you've had federal awards before and what sort of internal capacity you have for managing these funds. If you have questions, either reach out to our office, but it can also be helpful to discuss with your organization's legal representative or with your organization's financial manager to get specific responses for these questions. And the final section of the application attachment, or I'm sorry, and the final section of the application is the application attachments. There's one required attachment, which is the agency's W-9 form, and that will be needed to be attached into the DocuSign application. And there are two optional documents. One that we didn't discuss previously is the DOA form regarding designation of confidential information. If you have questions on this, I encourage you to see your application instructions. That links to the document for the designation of confidential information and also the instructions. Please read those instructions fully so you can understand if this form is applicable to your organization. And if it is, please attach it to the application. And then when I mentioned earlier in the narrative section, if you're proposing to subcontract or sub-award funds to carry out services, please make sure that you are including any proposed subcontracting materials. Because again, due to the shortened time frame, we need to understand where you're at in that process and how quickly you would be able to move forward with any subcontracts and the qualifications for those subcontractors. All right, let's go through and fill out one of the applications online. Robin, before I dive in, do I need to pause on any other sections or wait for those sections later?
We will give you a few questions at the end.
Okay, perfect. I just wanted to make sure. All right, so we're going to fill out category A, just so that we can see what that looks like with multiple subcategories. Hopefully you all can see this. It's a little zoomed out. First part is fairly straightforward. You want the legal representative to use their first and last name, which I apparently did not do, in this section and complete their email. This is a critical part of this portion of the application. If you want to receive a copy of your completed application, please fill out the information here so you can receive a courtesy copy. Oh, it's just going to fill in everywhere. But you can fill in your name, or the authorized representative can make sure that they're receiving a copy. This could be an additional recipient and a further additional recipient. So in total, filling out this section after you fill in your authorized representative, you can have your authorized representative received a completed copy of the application, and then two other folks at your organization can be identified to receive a courtesy copy of the application that you submitted in DocuSign. I also want to mention in the application instructions that there are system requirements identified for what your web browser needs to be in order to access DocuSign. So that's at the end of the application instructions. So if you have any questions or technical questions about DocuSign, I would start there for some helpful resources. And again, making sure that you check the box that you agree to use electronic signatures, information about when the submission deadline is, where you can access additional information, and then select continue. Now I've got my additional information filled out, but you're going to go through and fill out all of your information, including the organization's legal name, if you're doing business as, that's optional, but you'll see that the sections that are highlighted in blue are required. And you can see as you hover over it that it explains that. So go through and make sure you're filling out this information, highlighting again that we want to make sure that that contact person is the correct person, and making sure that you fill out your required DFI entity ID, which you can find additional information in the instructions, and your EIN. We previously mentioned that the remit contact person, making sure that if it's different from the person identified above, that you identify them here, and having the organization's correct address identified here. So be mindful. As I realized I spelled Madison wrong. Make sure that that information is correct so that we can communicate with you appropriately. Highlighting here, please list the Wisconsin counties in which the organization operates. I'm listing statewide for this sample organization, but if you provide services in Outagamie or Dane County or Florence, name the county or multiple counties that you are proposing to provide services in and which you operate in. Going through to the sections, again, I am completing this information prior to logging into DocuSign and copying and pasting from over there. And this is obviously just some dummy information, but it's there to show you how hopefully straightforward this process will be. So making sure that you address all sections of the question. Here's where you can see the character limits. And we're going to just go through and finish up this portion of the application. Five questions. We're on question 3, which would be the proposed services. Notice here that proposed services and the organizational experiences is slightly higher on character limits, so that can be helpful to pay attention to. Entering in some information for the population to be served. And then entering in information for the Wisconsin residents. Fairly straightforward for those. Narrative section, we just want the text copied and pasted in, and hopefully you can see that it's fairly easy and straightforward. Now we're going to move on to the budget. We've got a few sample items to enter in. As I mentioned, the dates are drop down, so please utilize those. And then have a brief description. As you can see from the information included here, you can group expenses together if they are similar. And I'm just putting in some sample information. There should hopefully be enough line items as well. And you can see at the bottom, it is auto totaling. And that will carry over to the budget summary page as well. One other thing I wanted to highlight, all of the budget sections are outlined as optional for application categories that have multiple subcategories. However, you need to include a budget in one of them for the applications. The reason it's optional for categories with multiple subcategories is you're not required to apply for each subcategory. So be mindful if you are filling out an application for category A, suicide prevention and firearm storage grants, or for category B, which is evidence-based violence intervention and prevention, or I'm sorry, evidence-based violence intervention and outreach programs, that you are including a budget under at least one subcategory. You can see it auto totals here. The other budget categories for the subcategories, if you choose to apply for multiple subcategories, you are welcome to do so. And then the total carries over to here. So make sure that that information totals correct compared to your notes that you have as you went into filling the budget, and double check that information. And I want to reiterate again, because we've had several questions, you can apply for more than one category. You just need to submit separate applications for each of those categories. However, you can apply for multiple subcategories within a grant application. This is the attestations page that we mentioned in the slides. So making sure that you go through and you select the appropriate answer that fits your organization. Please read through them, make sure that you understand what you're attesting to. We also have the financial capability questionnaire. One of the things that I wanted to highlight is that if you select yes to certain radial buttons, it will allow you to enter in information into the corresponding text box. So if you look through here, like if I selected yes, that would display and you should enter in information if it does, but if I select no, it does not. Make sure that you understand, which of the following best describes your organization. So again, if you're not sure of that, either talk to your legal representative or your financial person. And if there is information that you would like to share pertaining to your financial capabilities, please include that in the space allotted below. Here's where DocuSign allows you to sign. So you're going to look for the signature, that best suits you, adopt it and sign, and it will auto fill out your name, the date that's signed, and your email. You will have to populate your title and your phone. It just did that for me because I had done a practice run of this earlier. So making sure that you have that correct contact information so that we know how to contact you. If there is an additional authorized representative, they can also sign there as well. And then the last section, as we mentioned, is the application attachments. You can see as a reminder that it puts right here, so you don't have to remember which ones are required and which ones are optional. So we're going to upload our W-9. There are additional instructions included in the application instructions if you need to complete a new W-9. It links to the IRS website as well as the IRS form instructions. Now, I did have an issue earlier uploading the W-9 from the IRS due to the type of file that it was saved as. So please make sure that if you have any issues that you maybe work with, you can reach out to us or try and save the document as a Word document to upload it, or save it as a non-fillable PDF after you filled in the required information from the IRS. And then if you need to attach the DOA designation of confidential and proprietary information, you can do that here. And if you are proposing a subcontractor or a subawardee, you can include that information there. Once you add an attachment, you'll notice that it attaches here. So the W-9 is now uploaded along with the application. So it's all in one document and it's all together. This is a key piece. We want to make sure that we finish and actually submit the document so that your application can be counted and then reviewed. So select finish and you're redirected automatically to the Department of Administration website. That was a brief, quick walkthrough. Again, if you have your responses ready in a Word document or somewhere else, you can copy and paste it in. The budget will take a little bit more time because you have to individually fill out those lines in the table. But again, the idea is to hopefully make it a fairly straightforward process for you. And that you can double check your work with the auto-populated for the budget totals. What are some best practices for completing your DocuSign application? As we talked about at the beginning of the presentation, utilize that convenience copy to draft your responses so that you can hopefully just go through the application and add in your responses rather than trying to draft, because there isn't really a good way to save and come back to DocuSign. And then when you are ready to open that DocuSign application, make sure that you can complete that application in one sitting. We don't want you to put in a bunch of work for your application and then it not save or something go wrong. So best practice, complete your responses outside of DocuSign and be ready to upload in one sitting when you are ready to submit your application. Some final notes that we want to bring to your attention. Again, if you are successful in the application process and are receive an award, the record keeping requirements for this grant, you are solely responsible for documenting that expenses are eligible under the American Rescue Plan Act. You must keep your records of your eligible costs for 5 years. And then ineligible cost determinations made by the state or any federal audits have to be repaid to the state. Additionally, if you are successfully awarded, reports summarizing the use of funds and describing the impact on the grantee and the individuals it serves will be required during the grant period, and we will supply the reporting documents and due dates. A few more additional notes. If you by chance decide that you want to withdraw your application, that is allowed until the deadline of January 16th. Please contact the program via OVP at wisconsin.gov to withdraw your application. Final reminder of some of the important dates. Questions are due to our office by December 17th at 2 p.m. And the applications are due at 2 p.m. on Friday, January 16th of 2026. For the questions that are due, again, OVP at wisconsin.gov or dropping them into the Q&A of this webinar so that we can add that to our list of questions. And the frequently asked questions will be posted to the website sometime following the deadline for those questions. And if you don't see it in the FAQs document, we will respond to you individually. Before we get into answering a couple of questions, we won't be able to address all of the questions that were submitted in the allotted time. However, again, if your question was not addressed, we'll either be adding it to the FAQ document or responding to you directly after the webinar. We are doing our best to get back to folks as quickly as possible and as thoughtfully as possible, since we know there is so much interest in these funds and in the application. So I'm going to pause for a second and see what questions we have.
Great. Kimberly Randall has asked a few good specific program example questions that I will hand to you, Amanda. First question is, would an existing program that teaches healthy relationships, consent, IPV, education, and prevention fit this grant criteria?
I absolutely think it would fit this grant criteria. And again, we encourage those types of programmings. If you are existing and you've been providing these services previously, it's a great opportunity to apply for continuing some of those activities under this grant award program.
Second question is, would we be able to use this money to improve our current program and expand it?
Excellent question. And indeed, you would be able to expand and enhance your current programming. I think that's an excellent example of what we hope to accomplish with these funds in the time that we have.
Our final question is, if our violence prevention program doesn't speak to gun violence, is that a disqualifier?
It is not a disqualifier. As mentioned in the application documents, this is about addressing violence and gun violence prevention. So we want to be as broad as possible. That's really what the governor's intention was when crafting and working with our office to create these applications. So we hope that you apply.
And Amanda, we have one quick technical note on DocuSign. So
Okay.
while we would encourage everyone to use that convenience copy to create a working draft that you can use when you actually go into the live version of DocuSign and submit your application, there is a finish later function in DocuSign that will allow you to kind of, for lack of a better term, save a draft of your application that you could come back to. So that is an option that's available to you. We would encourage you to enter your application all in one sitting so as to not lose all of your hard work. Creating that draft in Word or using the convenience copy as a reference will allow you to cut and paste right into the application portal and make the most efficient use of your time. So just wanted to point that out for folks in the event that is something that you need to use while submitting your application.
Wonderful. I appreciate the clarification, and hopefully it assuages some people's anxiety when logging into DocuSign to submit their award.
We have time for one more question too.
Yeah.
It came in as a good question that just came in. If folks have questions about what category would be best suited for their particular service or application, how would they best go about getting that addressed?
Couple of things first. I think it can be helpful to review the section, I think it's 4.1 on eligible applicants, to see suggested agencies that we think might be applicable. Again, it's not exhaustive. We don't want to exclude anyone. It's just to get ideas generating. So checking that section, it is listed by category and subcategory, what types of organizations might be well suited to providing those services. And then under, I think it's section 6 of the narrative, and these are all in the grant announcement document. Sorry, I should have clarified that. So in the grant announcement document, in section 4.1 for eligible applicants, and then in section 6 on the narrative, there are category example activities. Not exhaustive, it's just suggestions, again, of things that we've seen and that we've heard folks are doing in those category areas, but try to figure out the area that you best fit into. And if you have questions and they're not addressed in the grant announcement document, by all means, reach out to OVP and we will get back to you as soon as we can. Again, we have had a lot of questions and we're doing our best to get back in a timely manner. So we just ask ahead of time for your patience as we work to address those questions as quickly as possible. So to recap, Robin, just to make sure I'm really clear, review the grant announcement, check the eligible applicant organizations to kind of get a sense if that makes, if you can see an area where you might fit best. Look at the example categories, activities under section 6 in the grant announcement. And then if that fails and you can't find out and you just want to be extra sure, reach out to OVP. And I'm going to move to the next slide so that you can see the address. Again, fairly straightforward address, so hopefully that's easy to remember, ovp@wisconsin.gov. We're working to get, we have multiple folks monitoring that inbox to try to get back to folks as quickly as possible. But as I mentioned earlier, this is a newer grant program, so we're still getting back to folks in a little bit of a delay as we work out some of the details. So we, again, thank you in advance for your patience. Any questions in general, it is most helpful to share with the OVP inbox, whether it's related to which program category to apply for, anything related to the grant. It is the easiest method for us to make sure that those questions are being responded to and that we are tracking them appropriately. It's also helpful for us to see what questions are being asked the most. So again, we can figure out if there needs to be additional clarifying information provided to the field at large about some sections or portions of the grant that might not be clear. So I encourage you to utilize ovp@wisconsin.gov. Check the website so that you can see all the up-to-date information about the grant. And in general, we thank you all for your time today and we look forward to your applications. Robin, if there's nothing else, I think we can let folks get back to their day. Again, we'll be posting the FAQs sometime next week, but we thank you for your time today.
And thank you, Amanda. One of the spaces that we'll be sure to include in the Q&A document and respond to some of you directly on is regarding several of your questions regarding the qualified census tracts and the intention of that estimated number of Wisconsin residents served. So we'll provide some clarifying information for you all on that, as well as the other questions that you have. So
Thank you, Robin. Wonderful. Happy Thursday, everyone. Good luck applying, and we hope that you reach out with further questions, and we look forward to reading your applications. Take care, folks, and have a great day.